My father had just looked at me across the good china. The plates we only used when he wanted to feel like a man who had made it, and he had said it slow, so everyone could taste each word. You are the daughter who will never be worth anything. And the room held its breath. I remember I didn't cry right away. That's the strange thing. My eyes just filled the way a glass fills, no sound, no drama, just the slow rise of water that has nowhere else to go. I remember thinking in that flat, floating way you think when you've been hit, don't let it fall, don't you dare let it fall in front of them. And then, from behind my father's chair, from the doorway he hadn't heard open, because he was too busy enjoying the shape of his own cruelty, a voice. Low, even almost gentle. Why is my fiancé crying? My father's shoulders went up around his ears. He didn't turn around yet. None of them did. My name is Renata Osai, and for 29 years, I was the story my family told to keep the other children in line. You know the kind? Every family has a shelf where they keep their warnings, and I was the one they reached for. Study hard or you'll end up like Renata. Save your money or you'll end up like Renata. Marry sensibly, be practical, be realistic, or, God forbid, you'll end up like her. I was the daughter who didn't turn out right. That was the phrase. Not failed, that would have been too clean, too final, and my father was an accountant. He never liked to close an account he could keep charging interest on. Didn't turn out right, present tense, ongoing. A verdict that renewed itself every time I walked into a room. Let me tell you what didn't turn out right actually meant. It meant I became a freelance interior stylist instead of a doctor. It meant I chose a life where I made rooms beautiful for other people. I found the exact gray that turns a cheap flat into somewhere calm. I knew how a single lamp in the right corner can make a person feel safe when they come home, and my family looked at that gift and saw only that it didn't come with a pension. I was good at it. I want to say that clearly because for a long time I couldn't. I was very, very good at making beauty out of almost nothing. Give me $100 and a dead apartment, and I'll give you back somewhere you want to live. That's not a small thing. But in my father's ledger, talent that didn't convert directly into salary was just a hobby with delusions. I grew up in a house where love was a payment you earned by performing. My older brother, Quame, performed magnificently. Straight A's, then a scholarship, then a corporate job with a title long enough to need two breaths to say. He married Priscilla, who had the same instincts my father did. She could find the one soft place in you and press it, smiling, and call it honesty. And me, I was the control group, the before picture. The one who proved, by simply existing at a lower income bracket, that my father's philosophy of tough love worked, because look what happens when you don't listen. My mother, Adiz, watched all of it from the corner of every room, saying nothing. I used to hate her for the silence more than I hated him for the noise. He, at least, believed what he was doing. She just endured it and let me be endured alongside her. Here is the part I'm least proud of. I kept coming back. Every dinner, every holiday, every anniversary of some triumph of Quame's that I was required to attend and applaud, I showed up. I put on the nice dress that was 3 seasons old, and I straightened my back, and I walked into that house hopping. Hopping this would be the year my father saw me. Hopping he'd ask about my work and mean it. Hopping the shelf where they kept me as a warning would finally have a different story on it. That's the wound that doesn't scar over, if you're wondering. Not the cruelty. You can build a callus against cruelty. It's the hope. The hope keeps the wound soft. It keeps it open, so it can be hit again in exactly the same place. I met Julian 18 months before that dinner. I'm not going to give you the whole meet cute because it wasn't one. I was styling a show apartment in a building his company was involved in, and he came through on a walkthrough, and I didn't know who he was. That's important. I genuinely did not know. He was a man in a plain gray coat who stopped in the doorway of the room I'd just finished and stood there for a long moment, and then he said, quietly, "You made this feel like someone's already happy here." Nobody had ever described my work back to me like they'd felt it instead of priced it. We talked, he asked good questions and listened to the answers, which, if you've ever been the person nobody listens to, you'll know is a form of oxygen. We got coffee. Then dinner. Then it was a year, and then it was a ring, and somewhere in there I found out what he actually was. Julian Vance, the hotel chain, the name on buildings in cities I'd never been to. A billionaire, though he hated the word and flinched a little every time it landed near him. And I made a decision, then, that I want you to understand, because everything that happened later turns on it. I decided not to tell my family who he was. Not out of shame, out of the opposite. I wanted one time, just one time in my whole life, to be loved for the thing I actually was, and not the thing I could provide. I had spent 29 years being measured by a scale that only weighed money. I would not walk into that house and drop Julian's net worth on the table like a winning card. Because if they suddenly loved me then, it wouldn't be me they loved. It would be the number. So I told them I was engaged to a good man named Julian who worked in property. True, incomplete, and I told myself I was protecting something. I was protecting the last soft, foolish, hopeful part of me that still thought my father might, if I gave him nothing to be impressed by, choose to be proud of me anyway. That was the part he was about to put his fist through. The dinner was Julian's idea, and I said yes too fast. The way you say yes to things you're terrified of, because saying yes feels braver than admitting the terror. I'd like to meet the people who made you, he said. I almost laughed. They didn't make me, I wanted to say. They spent 29 years trying to unmake me, and I survived it by accident. But I didn't say that because you don't hand someone the map to your ruins on a good evening. You wait until the ruins come out to say hello on their own. The week before, I did what I always did before going home. I got smaller. It's a physical thing, if you've lived it. Your voice drops. You rehearse neutral answers to questions that are really traps. You pick clothes that won't be commented on, which is impossible, because the commenting isn't about the clothes. I stood in front of my mirror in the little flat I'd made beautiful with my own two hands and my own empty wallet, and I watched myself shrink in real time, and I hated it. Julian caught me at it. He does that, catches things. You've gone somewhere, he said. He was sitting on the edge of my bed, in a room he could have bought the building of, looking as at home as if he'd grown up there. Where'd you go? I'm just my family's a lot, I said. My dad especially, he can be sharp. I watched him for the flinch. The recalculation. I'd seen it on other faces. The moment someone realizes the woman there with comes with a father like mine and starts quietly counting the exits. Julian didn't flinch. Sharp how? He asked, not scared, just wanting to know the terrain. He measures people, I said, by what they earn, what they're worth, he calls it, and I've never measured up. I tried to make it light. I'm sort of the family's before and after, the after if you don't listen to your father. Julian was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I didn't understand the weight of until much, much later. I know that kind of measuring, he said. I know exactly what it does to a person. And he took my hand, and I let the subject drop, because I was too busy being afraid of Thursday to hear what he just told me. I told him to arrive at 7. The plan, my small, doomed protective plan, was for me to get there at 6:30, ground myself, weather the first wave, and then have Julian arrive after the worst of the sizing up was done. Julian arrived early. I didn't know that yet. That's the thing about the moment that breaks your life open. You're never looking at it when it happens. You're looking somewhere else, bracing for a different blow. The good china was out. That was the first sign the evening had teeth. My father only broke out the good china when he had an audience worth performing for, and a fiancé of mine in property was, apparently, an audience. He decided in advance what tonight was. Tonight was going to be a demonstration. Of what I didn't fully grasp until he began. Quame and Priscilla were already there, of course, radiant in the way people are when they've never once had to wonder if they're welcome. Priscilla hugged me at the door with her arms and appraised me with her eyes, top to bottom, and said, "You look tired, Ren, but cozy. Very you," and I felt the little press of her thumb finding the soft place. Cozy. A word for a chair you settle into and forget, not for a woman. My mother kissed my cheek and said nothing, which was her whole language. We sat, my father held court. He asked about the young man, and I said Julian was on his way, and my father made a small sound in his throat, the sound of a man reserving judgment he'd already passed. Property, he said, rolling it around, renting or owning. He works in development, I said. Development, my father repeated in the tone of a man discovering a stain. So sales then commission. He said commission the way other men say charity. Well, at least it's steady, I suppose, if he's any good at it. Is he any good at it, Renata? Or is he another one of your, he gestured vaguely at me, at all of me, my whole life summed up in a flick of the wrist, artistic types. He's good at what he does, I said, and I heard my own voice do the thing, the getting smaller thing, and I hated it and I couldn't stop it. And then my father set down his fork, and I knew the way you know weather. He'd been building to something all night, and it was here. You know what your problem has always been, he said, not a question. He turned to the table to Quame, to Priscilla, to my silent mother, gathering his audience. Your brother I never worried about, your brother I could bank on, but you? He looked back at me. You I had to carry every school, every year, and what did it buy me? A girl who paints rooms for other people because she couldn't make anything of her own. Solomon, my mother said, barely, a breath with his name in it. He didn't hear it, or he chose not to. He was warm now, warmed up, and I have thought about this so many times since. He enjoyed it. There was pleasure in his face, not rage. Rage I could have forgiven. Rage is hot and stupid and human. This was cold. This was a man balancing a book and finding satisfaction in the number. I'll tell you what you are, he said. So this young man of yours knows what he's signing up for before he wastes his life. You are the daughter who will never be worth anything. And the room held its breath. I told you already about the water rising in my eyes and my whole body's single command, don't let it fall. I told you about the fork set down too carefully and my mother reading the tablecloth. I told you it was full, that quiet. Now you know what filled it. What I didn't tell you is what I was thinking, underneath. I was thinking, he finally said it out loud. The thing he's been saying in 1,000 small ways for 29 years. He finally said the whole sentence. And some sick, exhausted part of me was almost relieved, the way you're relieved when a long-feared diagnosis is finally spoken, and at least now it has a name. That's when the voice came from the doorway. Why is my fiancé crying? My father's shoulders went up around his ears. He didn't turn. None of them turned. For one long, suspended second, the whole table was frozen in the exact shape of its cruelty, caught mid-motion like a photograph, and standing in the doorway behind my father's chair, in his plain gray coat, holding a bottle of wine he'd brought for a family that had just told his fiancée she was worthless, was Julian. He'd arrived early. He'd heard all of it. I watched my father's mind work. I watched him turn slowly and register the man in the doorway, the coat, the stillness, the absolute lack of fear in a stranger's face, and I watched him do the thing he did to everyone, the automatic appraisal, the sizing. And I watched something not add up, because Julian didn't look like commission. Julian looked like weather too, a different kind. You must be Julian, my father said, recovering, reaching for host. We were just. I heard what you were just, Julian said, calm, not raising his voice. He crossed the room and he did not go to my father's outstretched hand. He came to me. He crouched down beside my chair so his eyes were level with mine, and he ignored every other person in that room completely. And he said only to me, "Do you want to stay?" Not let's go, not rescuing me, not making the choice for me the way everyone in my life had always made my choices for me. He asked. He put it in my hands. No, I said, I don't want to stay. Okay, he said. And he stood and he helped me up, and he set the bottle of wine down on the good china with a soft, final click. And he said to the table, to all of them, in a voice with no heat in it at all, "Thank you for dinner." And we left. You'd think a family caught like that, caught red-handed, cruelty photographed midair would feel shame. They didn't, they felt strategy. I heard the whole of it later, in pieces, and every piece was worse than the last. But the shape of it that first night was this. Within an hour of us walking out, my family had already rewritten the evening so that they were not the villains of it. The theory they landed on, I know this because Priscilla, who could never resist a wound, told my cousin, who told me the theory was pity. Julian, they decided, had not defended me because he loved me. Julian had defended me because he pitied me. A man like that, whatever he was, and they still didn't know exactly what he was, only that the coat was too good and the stillness was too sure, a man like that was slumming. Passing through. He'd stepped in the way you'd help a stranger who dropped their groceries. Gallant, momentary, meaningless. He'll get a good look at her real life, Priscilla said, and he'll be gone by spring. My real life, the little flat, the freelance income, the absence of a pension. He'll get a good look at that, they told each other, and he'll come to his senses. Do you understand what they were doing? They had just been shown, unmistakably, that a good man loved me. And rather than let that reframe a single thing about how they treated me, they metabolized it into more evidence that I was pitiable. They took the one piece of proof that I was worth something and turned it, in under an hour, into proof that I wasn't. That is what a certain kind of family does. The story about you is load-bearing. If it falls, the whole house falls, because if I wasn't worthless, then what had my father been doing to me all those years? He couldn't afford for me to be worth something. My worthlessness was holding up his entire understanding of himself as a good father administering hard truths. So the story had to stand. Facts would be bent around it. Even a billionaire in the doorway would be bent around it. Julian drove me home that night. He didn't fill the car with talk. When we got to my building, he walked me up, and in the doorway of the little flat I'd made beautiful, he looked around at it, really looked, the way he had the first day, and he said, "You did all this yourself." "It's small," I said, reflex, making myself small to match it. "It's the most cared for room I've been in for years," he said, "and I've been in a lot of rooms." I started crying again then, but a different kind. The kind that comes when someone hands you back a thing about yourself you'd been trained to be ashamed of and calls it beautiful. "They think you pity me," I said, before I could stop myself. "They've decided you're going to see my real life and leave." Julian was quiet for a moment, and then he said a sentence I would think about for months. "Your father looked at me," he said, "and tried to work out how much I was worth. I watched him do it. And I want you to know, the first time in my life someone measured me like that, I was 16 years old, and I believed the number they came up with. I didn't understand. I filed it away without understanding it. I was too tired, too wrung out, too full of the day. I'd understand it later, when it mattered most. My father found out who Julian was within 24 hours. I know it was 24 hours, precisely, because of what he did with the information and how fast he did it. Here's what I think happened, reconstructed from what came out later. My father went home from that dinner rattled, not ashamed, rattled, which is different. A stranger had walked into his house and been unafraid of him, and my father's whole authority was built on people being afraid of him. So he did what accountants do when they're unsettled. He looked up a number. He searched Julian's name, and the internet, which does not care about your family's carefully maintained fictions, told him. Julian Vance, the hotel chain, the buildings, the word my father worshipped above all others, the word he'd spent my whole childhood telling me I would never deserve, wealthy. And in that moment, my father's story about me, the pity theory, the gone by spring theory collapsed, and something far uglier moved in to replace it. Because if Julian wasn't slumming, if Julian was real, then my father hadn't just humiliated his worthless daughter in front of a passing stranger. He'd humiliated her in front of the richest man he would ever be in a room with. And that man was about to become family. A weaker man might have panicked and apologized. My father did maths. The first I heard of it was from Marisol. Marisol was Julian's executive assistant, had been for 9 years, since long before the money got this big. She was the kind of competent that's almost frightening. She ran Julian's professional life like a surgeon, and she'd taken one look at me early on and decided, I learned this later, that I was good for him, and that she would therefore quietly, permanently have my back. I didn't know that yet either. I thought she was just his assistant. She called me on a Tuesday, careful voice. "Renata," she said, "I need to tell you about a phone call the office received. And I need you to hear that I'm telling you because you deserve to know, not to cause trouble." My father had called Julian's office. Not Julian, the office. He'd gone around me entirely, hadn't called me, hadn't called Julian directly, had gone to the corporate switchboard like a man filing a complaint about a service. He'd asked to speak to someone about the personal legal arrangements of Mr. Vance's engagement. He explained to a bewildered receptionist and then to Marisol to discuss a prenuptial agreement. A sensible one. He wanted to make sure, his words, Marisol repeated them to me flatly, the way you'd read out evidence, that the family's interests were protected, given the disparity and given Renata's history with money. Given Renata's history with money. My father, talking about my history with money, to the office of the man I loved, trying to negotiate behind my back, a contract about how much of Julian I would be allowed to keep, framed, brilliantly, as protecting me, when what he was actually doing was inserting himself as a broker into my marriage so that he could finally sit at the table where the real money was decided. He hadn't apologized. He hadn't even mentioned the dinner. Within a day of learning what Julian was worth, he'd repositioned himself from the man who called me worthless to the man who would manage the transaction of my worth. I remember I had to sit down on my own kitchen floor. "Renata," Marisol said, "are you there?" He didn't even ask if I was okay, I said. After Thursday, he never called to see if I was okay, but he found the switchboard number in a day. "I know," she said, and then, quieter, "there's something else, and I want your permission before I do anything with it." She paused. People like your father, I've seen this before with other families when the money changes. There's usually a pattern, not just one cruel dinner, a whole shape of it going back years. If you ever wanted to understand the shape, if you ever needed to protect yourself, I know how to look. I didn't answer for a long moment. I've been keeping the voicemails, she added. The ones your father's been leaving the office, not deleting them, just keeping them in case. I should have said no. Some clean, forgiving part of me wanted to say no, leave it, don't go digging in the ruins. But a colder, older part of me, the part that had sat on 1,000 kitchen floors, said something else. Keep them, I said, and Marisol, thank you. The engagement stopped being a secret the way these things always do, sideways, through other people's mouths, gaining speed. Someone saw us, someone recognized Julian. A photo ended up somewhere it shouldn't have, and then a caption, and then the name of the woman on his arm, and then, because the internet is a machine for turning private lives into public property, the name of the woman's family. And overnight, my family became close to me. I want to describe this precisely, because it's one of the strangest things I have ever lived through. For 29 years, I had begged, silently, for these people to want me. And now, suddenly, in a matter of days, they wanted me so much. Quame called. Quame, who had not initiated a phone call to me since roughly the invention of the phone, called to tell me how proud he was, how he'd always known I'd land on my feet, how we should do more as a family. Priscilla started posting photographs, old ones. Photos of me at family gatherings that she'd cropped and filtered and captioned with words like sisters and always so close and my ride or die. Photos in which, if you looked, you could see me standing slightly apart, slightly behind, the way the family warning always stands, but the caption said close, and captions are louder than photographs. There was a lunch, Priscilla organized it. She wanted, she said, a proper photo, all of us for the announcement. She positioned everyone. She positioned me, front and center, my father's hand placed on my shoulder. I still remember the weight of that hand. A hand that had never once rested on me in comfort, arranged there for a camera, and everyone smiled, and the photo went up. And underneath it, Priscilla wrote something about how family is everything and how blessed we all were, and the likes came in, and the congratulations came in, and my family basked. None of them mentioned the dinner. Not one. It was as if it had never happened, as if a man had not stood in that doorway and heard my father call me worthless. It had been edited out of the family record entirely, and a new record was being written in real time, in captions, in poses, in a hand on my shoulder for a camera. The record in which we had always been close. Julian watched all of this with a stillness that I was learning to read. They're not being cruel now, I said to him one evening, almost defending them because that hope, that soft, foolish, load-bearing hope was so hard to kill. Maybe this is them trying. Julian considered how to answer. He always considered. I was building the company, he said finally. There was a period where I had almost nothing, and then a period where it looked like I might have a great deal. And I watched the second period bring back every person who'd vanished during the first, the exact same people, same faces, same smiles, and I noticed something. He looked at me. They didn't come back to apologize for leaving. They came back to be near the money. Those aren't the same thing, Renata. One of them is love finding its way home. The other is just gravity. Gravity, my family had not learned to love me. They had simply fallen toward the largest mass in the room, the way objects do, and I happened to be standing next to it. I didn't want him to be right. He was right. The second gathering was a bigger stage, and my father had learned nothing except that the stakes were higher. Julian's company was hosting an evening, part celebration, part business, a mingling of his real estate board and a handful of investors, and because our engagement was public now, a scattering of family. It was the kind of room my father had dreamed of standing in his whole life. Marble, real art on the walls, some of which I'd have loved to talk to someone about. The exact elite my father had worshipped from a distance for 60 years, and here he was, inside the velvet rope because of me. Because of the daughter, who would never be worth anything. He could not stand it. That's the only way I can explain what he did. It wasn't a plan. It was a compulsion. Standing in the one room he'd always wanted to be in, inside a status he had gained entirely through my worth, my father could not tolerate that the ladder he'd climbed was me. So he did the thing that had always restored his sense of order. He made me small to make himself tall. He did it in front of Julian's board. I was talking to two of the directors, a lovely older woman named Frances who ran acquisitions, and a younger man whose name I've forgotten. And it was going well, it was going so well, They were asking about my styling work, and I was actually talking about it, out loud without shrinking, because in that room, with Julian's ring on my hand and Francis leaning in with real interest, I had briefly forgotten to be ashamed of myself. And my father appeared at my elbow. Renata, he said, warm as poison, let the important people talk, sweetheart. He turned to Francis with an apologetic little smile, man to man, or rather man to money, a smile that said, you understand. You'll have to forgive my daughter, she gets carried away. She was always the excitable one, never quite learned when to hold back. He put his hand on my shoulder again, that same weight. We're still teaching her how to carry herself in rooms like this. Aren't we, Renata? It's a work in progress. Yes. And he laughed to invite them to laugh with him. I felt the old machinery start up inside me. The shrink, the apology forming in my throat before I'd done anything to apologize for. 29 years of training, kicking in on schedule. He's right, you're too much, hold back, get smaller, don't embarrass the family. Francis did not laugh. Francis looked at my father for a long, cool moment. This woman who ran acquisitions, who had spent her whole career reading the true value of things behind their inflated prices. And then she turned deliberately back to me, and she said, you were saying about the light in the east-facing rooms. I'd genuinely like to hear the rest. My father's smile curdled. And I want you to remember this, because it's the first time it happens in this whole story. I did not shrink. I don't know where it came from. Maybe from Francis refusing to laugh. Maybe from 18 months of a man who caught things telling me the truth about myself. Maybe I was just finally done. But I turned to Francis and I picked up my sentence exactly where my father had tried to bury it, and I finished it. Steadily, in front of him. The east-facing rooms, I said. You don't fight the morning light, you build around it. You let it be the most expensive thing in the room because it's free. Francis smiled. The young director wrote something down. My father stood there, his hand still hovering where my shoulder had been, holding nothing. And across the room, leaning against a marble column with a glass he wasn't drinking from, Julian watched me not shrink, and I saw him smile, small, private, fierce, like a man watching something he'd been waiting a long time to see. Later that night, Marisol found me by the coats. He cornered two of the investors before he left, she said quietly. Your father started asking them about the prenup situation, whether they thought it was handled, whether they could put in a word. She shook her head. Renata, I've watched a lot of people come into a lot of money. Your father isn't confused about how to behave. He knows exactly how to behave. He's choosing this every single time. I know, I said, and I did now. It had taken me 29 years, one dinner, one phone call, and one hand on my shoulder in a marble room, but I finally knew it was never that he didn't understand how to be kind to me. He understood perfectly. He was choosing, over and over, not to be. There's something you should see, Marisol said. When you're ready, not before. She held my eyes. It's about your college fund. Everything in me went very still. I didn't have a college fund, I said. I didn't get the scholarship, I wasn't good enough for it. Marisol didn't say anything. She just looked at me, gently, the way you look at someone who's about to find out that a thing they've believed about themselves for 12 years was never true. I need to back up and tell you what had been happening in the background, because I didn't know most of it while it was happening. After the prenup call, after my father went around me to the office to broker my marriage, Julian had made a quiet decision. He didn't tell me at the time, and when he finally did, he told me carefully because he knew how it might land. I asked my people to do a review, he said, of your father's finances, where they intersected with yours historically. My first reaction was to be angry. You investigated my family without telling me. I investigated the man who called my company to negotiate how much of me you'd be allowed to keep, Julian said, and there was, for the first time, a low, hard edge in his voice, not at me, at Solomon. A man who, from everything I could see, had spent your entire life running a con so quiet that even you had learned to call it your own fault. I didn't do it to control you, Renata. I did it because I have spent my whole life around people who dress up theft as discipline, and I recognized the smell of it. And I needed to know what he'd taken from you before he tried to take anything from us. He was right that it wasn't for me to be angry about. But I want to be honest with you. It took me a night to get there. Because someone loving you enough to actually look, at the machinery that broke you is its own strange grief. It means the breaking was real. It means someone can see it. For 29 years I'd been told the machinery was just me, just my character, just the natural consequence of a girl who didn't turn out right. And now a team of forensic accountants was quietly proving it had a mechanism and a date and an amount. Here is what they found, assembled from bank records and account histories, and yes, from the voicemails Marisol had been quietly keeping, my father's own voice over months, complaining about the disparity and Renata's history, building an unintentional confession of exactly how he saw me and had always seen me. 12 years ago, when I was 17, there had been a college fund. My grandmother, my mother's mother, who died when I was 15 and who was, I now think, the only adult in my childhood who ever looked at me and saw a whole person, had left money. Specifically, explicitly for my education. $40,000 placed in an account with my father as trustee because I was a minor to be released for my schooling. I never saw a cent of it, I never even knew it existed. What I knew, what I had been told at 17, in the kitchen, by my father, in a voice of great disappointment, was that I had failed to secure the scholarship I'd been counting on. That there was, therefore, no money for the university I'd been accepted into. That I would have to make other plans. That this was, he'd said, a lesson about what happens when you don't work hard enough for the things you want. I had believed him. Of course, I had believed him. He was my father, and I was 17, and I had already spent my whole life being taught that my failures were the natural order of things. So when he told me I'd failed to earn the scholarship, I didn't question it. I folded it into the story of myself. I became a woman who didn't turn out right, partly because of this exact moment. The moment I quietly accepted that I wasn't good enough for the money, and rerouted my entire life around a lie. The scholarship story was fiction. The money had been there. My grandmother's $40,000 meant for me, sitting in an account my father controlled. And over the course of that year and the two after it, according to the records, that account had been drained. Not stolen dramatically. Drained, quietly. Into the household, into other things, into, the records suggested, though this part twisted the knife, into some of what had smoothed Quame's path. The golden child's clear road had been paved, at least in part, with the education my grandmother had bought for me. And to cover the gap, my father had told a 17-year-old girl that she wasn't good enough. He hadn't just taken the money. That would have been theft, and theft you can be angry at cleanly. He'd taken the money and then handed me the shame for it. He'd made his crime into my character flaw. He'd stolen $40,000 and, in the same breath, stolen my belief in myself and used the second theft to hide the first. The worthless label wasn't a verdict on who I was. It was the cover story for what he'd done. Marisol gave me the bank statements in a plain folder, in a quiet cafe, on an ordinary gray afternoon. I want to tell you it was dramatic. It wasn't. It was paper. Rows of numbers, dates, a beginning balance and an ending balance, and, in between, the slow erasure of my future in increments small enough that nobody had to feel like a monster on any given Tuesday. I read my grandmother's name first. That's what undid me. Not the amount, her name. In memory of, for the education of Renata Osai. She'd written my name. She'd looked into the future and seen a granddaughter who deserved more than the family warning shelf, and she'd tried, from beyond her own death, to buy me a door out. And my father had spent it and locked the door, and told me I'd lost the key through my own laziness. I sat in that cafe and I did not cry, which surprised me. I'd cried at the dinner. I'd cried in my doorway. But this was past crying. This was the cold, clarifying place you reach when a lie you've organized your entire identity around finally cracks and drains out, and what's left behind is not grief. What's left behind is space. Room where the lie used to be. Because do you understand what those statements meant? They meant I had never been worthless. The whole architecture of my life, the shrinking, the smallness, the coming back to that house year after year hopping to earn an approval I could never earn, the whole thing had been built on a foundation that was false. I hadn't failed to get the scholarship. There was no scholarship I failed to get. I had been robbed, and then convinced that the robbery was my own fault, and I had lived inside that conviction for 12 years the way you live inside a house, not questioning the walls, because the walls are just where the world ends. The walls were a lie. And on the far side of them was a woman I might have been if a man had not needed me to be small so that his own theft could stay invisible. Marisol reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "What do you want to do?" she asked. Not "here's what you should do." What do you want? The same question Julian had asked in that first dinner. Do you want to stay? All my life, people had made my choices for me, and now, at the exact moment it mattered most, two people were handing my life back into my own hands. I looked at the statements, I looked at my grandmother's name. The family has their annual gathering in 3 weeks, I said slowly. Everyone comes, Dad loves it, it's his favorite day of the year. He gets to stand up and give a speech about the family's achievements, about worth. I almost smiled. He invites people to impress, business people, the exact kind he spent his whole life idolizing. Marisol was watching me carefully. I've been building something, I said. For 2 years, quietly. I never told them for the same reason I never told them about Julian, because I wanted it to be mine, not something they could take credit for or measure me by. I took a breath. I have a client list, Marisol, real ones, the kind of names my father would kill to have in the same room. I've been styling for people he reads about. He has no idea. To him, I'm still the girl who paints rooms. You want to present at the gathering, she said. I want to stand up in the room where he gives his speech about worth, I said, and I want to show them all exactly what I've built, with my own hands, from nothing, from less than nothing, from a lie about my own capability that I carried for 12 years. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me too. And then, when he's watched every person in that room see my value with their own eyes, then I want to hand him these. I put my hand flat on the folder. Not to threaten him, not for money. I don't want his money, I never wanted his money. I looked up. I want him to understand that I know. That the story he told me at 17, I know it was a lie. And I want him to understand it in the one place he'll feel it most. In the room he built to be worshipped in front of the people whose opinion is the only currency he's ever believed in. Marisol was quiet for a moment, then she said, "That's not revenge." "No," I said, "it's an audit." And for the first time in my life, I saw my father's profession as a gift he'd accidentally given me. He taught me, without meaning to, that eventually the books have to balance. That you can hide a withdrawal for a while, but the account remembers. That every quiet theft leaves a record, and records in the end get read. I was going to read his out loud. Before I tell you about the gathering, I have to tell you about Julian. Because there's a piece of this you don't have yet, and neither did I until the night before I stood up in that room. I was nervous, not about the plan was solid, but about doing it, about being the woman who does a thing like that instead of the woman who shrinks. And Julian found me at the window, doing the getting smaller thing in advance, and he sat down beside me, and he finally told me the sentence he'd been circling since the very beginning. "I told you once," he said, "that the first time someone measured me and I believed the number, I was 16. "You did," I said. "I never asked." I know I wasn't ready to be asked. He looked out the window for a while. "I didn't grow up with a family like yours, Renata. I didn't grow up with a family at all. I was in foster care from the time I was 9. Different houses, some fine, some not. By 16, I'd stopped expecting to be kept anywhere." I went very still. In 18 months in all our talking, he had never said this. "There was a caseworker," he went on. "Overworked, I think, more than cruel, but cruelty and exhaustion looked the same from underneath. I'd done something, gotten into some trouble, nothing serious, the kind of trouble a kid gets into when no one's coming for him. And she was filling out a form, and she didn't even look up, and she said," he paused, and I understood that he'd carried these words the exact way I carried my father's, folded up small and load-bearing. She said, "You're never going to be worth anything. You might as well accept it now and save yourself the disappointment." The room was very quiet. "The same words," I said. "The same words," he said. "Your father's words to the letter." I've heard that sentence in my sleep for 25 years. He turned to me. "And Renata, the day I met you in that show apartment, in the room you'd made feel like someone was already happy there, I didn't fall for you despite your family. When I met them, when I heard your father say it, I didn't think, what a shame, this beautiful woman with this ugly family. I thought, there she is, I recognized you." I'd spent my whole life turning that sentence into buildings, into empires, into a fortune I don't even want, trying to outturn a woman with a clipboard who told a scared kid he was worthless. And there you were, having spent your whole life turning the same sentence into beauty, into rooms where people feel safe, into care. Same wound, opposite medicine. I couldn't speak. "I didn't rescue you at that dinner," he said. "You keep thinking I rescued you. I didn't. I heard a man say the thing that broke me, to the person I love most in the world, and I stood in the doorway and I thought, not her too. She is not going to spend 25 years believing that, not if I can stand next to her while she takes it apart." He took my hand. "So tomorrow," he said, I'll be there, but I won't say a word. This isn't mine to win. Your father took your fund, so I'll make sure the paper is airtight. That part I can do. But the room is yours. The voice is yours. I'm just going to stand by the wall and watch you become the woman that caseworker and your father both swore neither of us could ever be. That's the twist my family never saw coming, not the money. The money was never the point, and it was never the weapon. The weapon was that the man they dismissed as slumming had been forged in the exact same fire I had, and he had not come to save me. He had come to hold the light while I saved myself. The annual gathering was everything my father loved. A hired hall, not the house. This year, buoyed by the family's new proximity to real money, he'd gone bigger than ever. Round tables. A little stage with a lectern because my father could not resist a lectern. Business acquaintances, neighbors he wanted to impress, the whole extended web of people whose good opinion was the only God my father had ever truly worshipped. He'd built it this year to show me off. That was the cruelest, most delicious part. I was, for the first time in my life, an asset to him, the daughter engaged to the billionaire, the daughter whose value had finally, in his ledger, gone positive. He wanted me there so that people would know. He wanted, I think, to give a speech that gestured warmly at me, the prodigal made good by a lucky marriage, and to bask in the reflected worth. He had no idea what I'd built. To him, I was still worth only what Julian was worth. He had never once imagined that the girl who painted rooms had, on her own, in secret, become someone. Priscilla had me placed at the head table, beside my father, for the photographs. My mother sat on his other side, silent as ever, though I'd catch her looking at me sometimes that night with an expression I couldn't read. Julian sat back at a side table by the wall, exactly as he'd promised. He wore the plain gray coat. He drank nothing. He watched. My father gave his speech. It was, I'll give him this, a good speech, if you didn't know the man giving it. He spoke about family and legacy and the value of hard work and how far the Osais had come. He spoke about worth, of course he spoke about worth. It was his only real subject. And near the end, he turned toward me with a smile I'd never once earned honestly, and he said, and of course, we're all so delighted at Renata's news. She's finally, a little pause, a little laugh, the audience leaning in, she's finally found her feet. Better late than never, sweetheart? Better late than never, even here. Even in the middle of celebrating me, he could not resist the small knife. Late, as if I'd been slow. As if I'd wasted years he had, in fact, stolen from me and then blamed me for losing. The room chuckled warmly, my father basked. And I stood up. Actually, Dad, I said, and my voice carried clear and steady across the hall, before you sit down, I prepared something too. If you don't mind. I think everyone here would like to see it. He didn't mind. Of course he didn't mind, how could he? To object would be to make a scene, and my father lived in terror of scenes he didn't author. He gestured me up to the lectern with a magnanimous sweep of the hand, playing the proud father for the room, certain, that whatever his artistic daughter had prepared would be sweet and small and easily patronized. I walked up to the lectern. I looked out at the room, at the business people, at the neighbors, at Priscilla's frozen smile, at my silent mother, at my father settling back into his chair with the indulgent expression of a man who has decided in advance to be charmed. At the back by the wall, Julian gave me the smallest nod. And I did not shrink. My father spoke about worth, I began. It's his favorite subject. It was the subject of my whole childhood, so I thought I'd talk about it too, but I thought, rather than tell you what I'm worth, I'd show you. I'd asked Marisol to load the images. They came up on the screen behind me, the rooms. My rooms, 2 years of work I had never shown a soul in that family. Not the little flats, the other work, the penthouses, the boutique hotel lobby I'd styled that had been in 3 magazines. The private residences of people whose names, when they appeared beneath the photographs, made a murmur move through that hall like wind through wheat, because these were the exact names my father idolized. The clients he'd have crawled across broken glass to sit next to, and they were my clients, my portfolio. My business, built quietly over 2 years while my father told anyone who'd listen that his daughter painted rooms. This is what I've been doing, I said. While you were all deciding I hadn't turned out right, I built a business from nothing. Actually, and here I let it land, gently, an accountant's daughter presenting a discrepancy from less than nothing. Because I built it while believing something about myself that wasn't true. I built it while believing I was a woman who, at 17, wasn't good enough to earn a scholarship, that I'd failed. That the reason I never went to the university I was accepted into was my own laziness. My father told me that, in the kitchen, when I was 17, and I believed him for 12 years. The room had gone quiet now. A different quiet. My father's indulgent smile was gone. So I want to close, I said, by correcting the record, because my father is an accountant, and he taught me that eventually the books have to balance. I took the folder out. Marisol had made copies. The images went up on the screen beside my portfolio. My grandmother's name, the account, $40,000 for the education of Renata Osai, and then the columns, the withdrawals, the slow, dated erasure. There was no failed scholarship, I said, and my voice did not shake, not once. There was a college fund. My grandmother left it for me. $40,000 for my education in an account my father controlled, and over 3 years it was emptied. And to explain where my future had gone, I was told at 17 that I simply wasn't good enough to have earned it. I looked at my father. He had gone the color of ash. He was half out of his chair, and the room's eyes were moving from the screen to him and back, and I watched the thing he feared most in the world happen to him in real time. I watched the good opinion he'd worshipped his whole life turn, in a single silent moment, into something else. You didn't just take the money, Dad, I said, quietly now, because I didn't need volume anymore. The room was so silent you could have heard my grandmother's name being read again in everyone's head. You could have just taken it. That would have been theft. But you took the money, and then you handed me the shame for it, and you let me carry it for 12 years. You made your crime into my character. You called me worthless, you said it at that dinner, in front of the man I love, because as long as I believed I was worthless, no one would ever ask what happened to the money. My worthlessness was the cover story. It was never true. It was just the wall you built around what you did. I closed the folder. I'm not here for the money, I said. I don't want it, I've made my own. Everyone in this room can see now exactly what I'm worth, and I earned every cent of it, and I earned it while believing a lie you told me. Imagine what I'd have built if I'd known the truth. I let that sit. I'm here because I wanted you to know that I know, in this room, on your favorite day, in front of the only jury whose verdict you've ever actually cared about. Nobody moved for a moment. And then my mother stood up. I need you to understand how impossible this was. Adiz Osa had not raised her voice in my defense in 29 years. Her silence was the wallpaper of my entire childhood. Always present, never spoken, a woman who endured beside me and let me be endured. I had long ago stopped expecting anything else. I had, honestly, half-directed the whole evening around her silence, braced for it, planning to be strong enough that I wouldn't need her. But she stood up. It's true, she said. Her voice was thin and it trembled, but it carried. She wasn't looking at the room. She was looking at my father. It's all true. I knew about the fund, Solomon. I knew what you did with it, and I knew what you told her. Her hands were shaking. And I said nothing. For 12 years I said nothing because it was easier, because you made everything so much worse when anyone crossed you, because I was a coward. She turned to me then, and her eyes were streaming. I'm so sorry, Renata. I watched him make you small, and I told myself there was nothing I could do, and that was a lie too. It was just another lie in this house. There was always something I could do, I just never did it. I hadn't planned for that. I want you to know that. Everything else I had planned to the letter, but not my mother standing up in that hall, breaking, after a lifetime of the corner. I had built the whole evening as a woman who no longer needed anyone. And I discovered in that moment that being wrong about that could feel like grace instead of weakness. My father found his voice. Of course he did. Men like him always find their voice. It's their empathy that stays lost. This is, he sputtered, rising, looking around the room for the audience that had always been on his side. This is a performance. She's twisting. The money was for the family. It was a difficult time. I made a decision as the head of. You told a 17-year-old she wasn't good enough, Francis said. I hadn't even seen her come in. She was standing near the back, near Julian. She'd been invited, I realized, part of the web of Julian's world that had begun to overlap with mine, and she said it flatly, the way she'd refused to laugh in the marble room, a woman who spent her life pricing things correctly. You stole a child's education and told her it was her fault. I heard her read the dates. I can read a statement, Mr. Osai, so can everyone here. She looked around the hall. We all just did. My father looked for an ally. He looked at Quame, Golden Quame, whose road might have been paved with my stolen door. And Quame looked at the table. Quame, who had called me to say how proud he was the moment I got useful, could not meet my father's eyes or mine. Quame said nothing, which was, I suppose, the family's true native tongue after all. Priscilla was already reaching for her phone, and I understood with a strange, cold clarity that she was gauging which way the story was about to break online. She who had captioned us close, sisters always, was calculating, in real time, whether closeness was still the profitable pose. It wasn't. She put the phone down. I didn't scream at my father. I want you to know that. I didn't need to. The audit was complete, the books were balanced, the record had been read aloud in the one room where he'd staked his whole soul on the reading coming out in his favor. What was there to scream? The numbers had done it. My grandmother's name had done it. My mother, finally, at the end of everything, had done it. There was only one thing left to say, and it wasn't mine to say. It was Julian's, the one sentence he'd break his silence for. He walked up from the wall. He didn't raise his voice, he never does. He stopped a few feet from my father, and he looked at him with an expression I finally recognized because I'd worn it myself. The calm of someone who has met this exact monster before, at 16, holding a clipboard, and has spent a lifetime learning it was always, always wrong. There's a rehearsal dinner next month, Julian said. For the wedding, you were going to be invited. He let that hang. You're not now, not until you can find a way to apologize to your daughter with no conditions attached to it, no, but no, it was a difficult time, no ledger, just an apology. The kind you give when you finally understand that the person in front of you was never the debt. She was always the fortune, and you spent her. He turned to me. Ready? He asked the same question, always mine to answer. Ready, I said. And we left for the second time, through a doorway. Except this time I wasn't crying, and this time the whole room was watching me go, not with pity. Not with a story about the daughter who didn't turn out right, but with the truth finally standing where the lie had stood for 12 years. My father did not get a redemption arc. I know that's what these stories are supposed to give you, the tearful reconciliation, the changed man, the Christmas where everyone hugs. I'm not going to give it to you because it wouldn't be true, and I'm done building my life around things that aren't true. He didn't apologize, not with no conditions, not with any. The last I heard, he was still telling a version of the story in which he was the wronged party, the head of the family betrayed by an ungrateful daughter and her arrogant fortune. Some people, when the account is finally called, would rather burn the whole ledger than admit the numbers. He's one of them. I've made my peace with that, not by forgiving him exactly, but by stopping. Just stopping. I stopped showing up to the house. I stopped bringing the soft, foolish hope to the door for him to put his fist through. 12 years I carried the shame he handed me. I set it down. It was never mine. My mother left him 3 months later. She's living near me now. It's not simple between us. 29 years of silence doesn't dissolve because of one brave minute in a hall, but she's trying, out loud, for the first time in her life, and I'm letting her. She comes to the studio sometimes and just sits in the corner and watches me work, and I think she's watching the daughter she might have protected and grieving her a little and getting to know the one who survived anyway. That's allowed to be enough. Not everything has to be a full repair. Some things just get to be a beginning. Quame and I are polite. Priscilla and I are not close, no matter what the caption said. That's fine. I don't need the family warning shelf to change its story about me anymore because I stopped living on it. Here's how it ends, the real ending, the one I chose. 3 weeks ago, I signed a lease. Not a flat, a studio, a real one, a proper storefront on a good street, big windows, morning light I fought no one to keep because I know now what to do with morning light. You let it be the most expensive thing in the room because it's free. A place where clients come to me. Where I do the work that 3 magazines and half of the names my father idolized already know me for. My business. Built by my own hands from less than nothing, from the far side of a lie. Julian came with me the day I signed. He offered once, quietly, to buy the building, because he could, because that's the shape of the world we live in now, and I said no, and he smiled because he'd known I'd say no, and I think he only offered so I'd get to say it. I'm not building my worth out of his fortune. I never was. I recognized that in him and he recognized it in me. Two people who took the same sentence, "You'll never be worth anything," and refused, over a lifetime, to let it be the last word. The sign painter came on a Tuesday. I stood on the sidewalk in the morning light and I watched him letter the glass door. And I want to tell you what it says, because it's the whole point. It's the entire 12 years distilled into a few square feet of gold leaf. It doesn't say Vance, it could have. It would have opened doors, that name. I know exactly what it's worth. It says Osai. My name, my grandmother's name, the one who wrote it into a fund meant to buy me a door out and was robbed of the chance, and who I like to think would recognize what her granddaughter finally built with the truth once she got it back. Renata Osai, on the glass, in gold, not a warning on anyone's shelf, not the daughter who didn't turn out right, not worthless, not late, not carried. A studio, a name, a morning full of free and expensive light. Julian stood beside me on the sidewalk while the paint dried, his hand in mine. not saying anything, because he catches things and he'd caught this one, that some moments don't need a voice added to them. And I looked at my name on the glass, earned, unerasable mine. And for the first time in 29 years, I didn't feel small at all.